In the post-Aurangzeb era, after a period of weak emperors with multiple quick succession, the devastating raid of Nadir Shah in 1739 was the final blow to Mughal Empire, and cracks were now more visible. In the Carnatic, it was more prominent, particularly along the Coromandal Coast, due to the region's remoteness from Delhi and the presence of several influential players, the Nawab, the Maratha, the Nizam, and rival European trading powers, especially the French and British. In this background, Joseph Francois Dupleix, the daring young genius who had just witnessed the chaotic Mughal India in Bengal as the French director of Chandranagore and had transferred Chandranagore from a neglected outpost to a bustling commercial place in French India, returned to Pondicherry, the emporium of French commerce in India, as Governor General in October 1741. The outgoing governor M. Duma had just sought retirement, under whose leadership the French had successfully averted the threat of marauding Maratha Sardar Raghuji Bhosle's mighty army, and were receiving applause and praise from all over, including the receipt of transferable rank of Nawab from Mughal Emperor of Delhi, Muhammad Shah, with the title of Mansabdar of 4,500 horses. Dupleix was well aware of the implication and significance of Mansabdari system of Mughal governance, so he started demonstrating it by demanding gifts and tribute from local petty chieftains and lower aristocracy to demonstrate the dominance. Nevertheless, challenges were awaiting Dupleix. Pondicherry area was not only suffering misery from famine due to the Maratha scorching invasion, but Pondicherry town fortification was also incomplete, particularly on the seaside, which was important when war rumors were looming between France and Britain in Europe. Further, the Carnatic area was near chaos. Following the defeat and death of Dost Ali, Maratha installed his son Safdar Ali as the Nawab of Carnatic in exchange for a ransom. Maratha was now demanding regular payment installment. Further, Subedar of Deccan, the Nizam, was also demanding revenue receivables long overdue as a vassal of Mughal. But Safdar Ali was unable to meet the demands and was not popular among the nobles. In the ensuing confusion, the conspirator Murtaza Ali, his brother-in-law, killed him and crowned himself as a Nawab of Arcot. This infuriated Murari Rao, the Maratha governor of Trichinopalli, who declared war. The strange nobility who opposed the conspirator Murtaza Ali petitioned the English in Madras to safeguard Safdar Ali's son and widow, then residing there with all their riches. Terrified, Murtaza Ali escaped to the stronger Vellore fort, while Sayyid Muhammad the Infant in Madras was proclaimed Nawab. In January 1743, Nizam marched into the Arcot with an army of 80,000 horses and 200,000 footmen, assuming control of the situation and appointed Khoja Khan as the governor of Arcot. He then moved to Trichinopalli, where Maratha Murari Rao fled without fighting, and after reoccupying the Mughal principality, Subedar then returned to Golconda along with Khoja Khan, where unfortunately Khoja Khan died. Then Anwaruddin Khan, a brilliant Sardar of Subedar, was appointed as administrator until the young Nawab of Arcot reached adulthood. But further, in a conspiracy in Madras, Murtaza Ali managed to kill the boy Nawab a few months later. Therefore, finally, Anwaruddin Khan was declared the permanent Nawab of Arcot in June 1744. In Europe, the French, while participating in the War of Succession of Austria, formally declared war against England in March 1744. As French were not so strong in Hindustan, Pondicherry was advised to sign a treaty of neutrality with the governor of English settlements. At the same time, La Bourdonnais, the governor of the Isle of France, was asked to proceed to India with a squadron to assist Dupleix. But the English squadron under Commodore Barnet had already reached the Indian Ocean and was engaged in intercepting the French ships and traders. A further blow was inflicted when, due to the compulsion of more important conflicts in Americas, the squadron under La Bourdonnais was recalled. Dupleix was left on his own with a garrison of 440 Europeans and a small ship which he sent to the Isle of France asking for help. Therefore, he adopted the tried and tested strategy of his forebearers, approaching native Indian allies for assistance when under attack by European foes. Nawab Anwaruddin Khan was the man to whom Dupleix appealed, reminding him of the friendship of the French and how support and protection were given to the Nawab's family during the Maratha invasion. Anwaruddin Khan was not insensible to the appeal, as neither of the European powers had shown any aggressiveness nor any European soldier superiority was performed on land. Therefore, to maintain peace under the jurisdiction, he asked English in Madras to avoid any kind of attack on French possession, assuring them also of any aggression on the part of French as well. Mr. Morse, the governor of Madras, had now no choice but to comply. Further, Dupleix was immensely relieved when in 1746 he got intelligence of the presence of the long announced and long despaired squadron of La Bourdonnais in Mahe. Bernard Francois Mahe La Bourdonnais joined the French East India Company at a very young age and in 1724 was promoted as a captain to become part of the squadron sent in the conquest of Mahe, the town on the Malabar coast which was named after him. He showed unparalleled courage in the conquest. Thereafter, he left French service and traded in his own ship in the Indian Ocean for some years before joining the Portuguese at Goa as their navy head for 2 years. Dismayed after working with another nation, he returned to France in 1735 to assume the position of governor of the Isle of France and Bourbon. He improved the administration of Ireland and substantially expanded the African enslaved population, also refurbished the port of Port Louis. In June 74, as per direction, with a squadron of locally made 9 ships and 3,340 men, of whom 1/4 were slaves, he reached Mahe in a military expedition to take over Madras. Here he got information about the English fleet of 6 ships waiting at Nagapatnam to intercept. The English were inferior of numbers and crews but superior in weight as they were armed mostly with 24-pounders. The fleet was led by Commodore Peyton, who had just taken over command after the sudden death of Commodore Barnet. On July 6, 1746 morning, they came face to face. Taking advantage of their heavier guns, the English inflicted more damage to the French, disabling their 3 ships but also losing a lot of their crews and causing heavy damage to their 1 ship. At night, Peyton decided to move south to Trichonamali, leaving the way open for La Bourdonnais, Pondicherry, and deserting the Madras. Emboldened, La Bourdonnais by evening anchored in now safe Pondicherry, thus completing one part of the difficult task of keeping Pondicherry safe. The French fleet now master of the Indian seas, and Madras was under severe threat. The French were having 2 great leaders against them, both men of genius, energy and ambition. One relatively young master of council, adept in statecraft and policy, but unacquainted with the war details. The other, older in age, experienced man of great action, accustomed to a command being obeyed at all costs. They met on July 8, 1746 in a pleasant environment. Although independent in command, La Bourdonnais was subordinate to the Pondicherry Council in India, and Dupleix was willing to delegate command of operation against the English, as both believed that the controlling Madras was the first part of the fruit of victory. However, the 2 strong heads soon disagreed on the Madras fate after the takeover and the sequence of operations. The admiral was concerned about the English squadron in area and wished to take control of Cuddalore and its fort St. Davis first before proceeding to Madras to take over against some ransom. With the differences in mind, the admiral moved on and appeared off the coast of Madras, where he landed troops on the shore on August 29. Fort St. George in Madras was built on a plot taken from the last Raja of Vijayanagar in 1639 and has now become the main English emporium in India. They had never considered such a threat and their defences were inadequate, with only 300 not-so-combatant ready European garrison. Earlier, after the French naval victory, Morse also informed Nawab Anwaruddin about the French plan of attack and requested to intervene. Nawab did not respond and refrained from interfering because Dupleix assured him that the French would hand over Madras to them. Accordingly, Madras was captured on September 21 with little fight. The admiral had 3 options: make it a French colony, raze it to the ground, or take a ransom. He opted for the third option, probably because besides the public ransom, a lot of private agents were given to him. Dupleix started to oppose this through various letters and officers sent for takeover. The confusion and confrontation between the 2 leaders continued for 1 month. La Bourdonnais was well aware of monsoon mayhem on the east coast during the October monsoon. Therefore, he hurriedly signed the Act of Capitulation, promising to hand over Madras for the agreed ransom to be paid in bills of exchange in the future. And he handed over the Madras command to the Pondicherry contingent under Paradis and left the storm-battered Madras seacoast on October 29, reaching Port Louis in a very bad condition after 4 months. Here he was asked to leave for France by the new appointed governor. And in France, he was put in jail for trial for the acquisition of charges of defying king's order, secret arrangements with the enemy, and the diversion of funds of the company. Meanwhile, the patience of Nawab was dwindling, as it had been 5 weeks since the French occupied Madras and there was no sign of handover. Therefore, to pressurize, the moment La Bourdonnais left the Indian shores, he deployed 10,000 troops near the Madras under the command of his son Mahfuz Khan. Initially, Dupleix wanted to raze Madras to the ground to make it useless before handover, which was now difficult in front of the Nawab army. And if he hands over now, the British could retake from the Nawab. Therefore, he thought to imply every hour to retain the Madras for French interest. He asked his new French governor Dupleix to avoid confrontation. Therefore, all French troops were taken inside the fort. Meanwhile, Mahfuz Khan, more keen to contest, seized the main drinking water source. Therefore, in desperation, Dupleix sent a body of 400 men, 2 field guns to attack and gain access to the spring. The detachment moved forward, followed by 2 guns hidden behind them. Mughal cavalry hurriedly collected and galloped towards them with attention to override them. But when they came to a point-blank range, the French column opened out from the center, uncovering the field guns, and the first charge was made against the hostile army, killing some of its foremost horses. This created confusion and a halt, which gave the French time to quickly charge again within a few minutes. The enemy was unaccustomed to such rapid charges and knew little about such European artillery practices. They considered one shot in 15 minutes excellent and were amused and halted in doubt, wonder, and fear. But when one by one the next charges were hurled, they became terrified and fled, leaving their tent and baggages as prey to the conqueror. They lost 70 men with no loss to the French. Meanwhile, indefatigable, Dupleix sent a contingent of 230 Europeans and 700 Sipais under Paradis command to compel Nawab to raise the siege of Madras. Mahfuz Khan received information about the march just after the defeat of his cavalry by the Madras garrison. He marched to St. Thome with the bulk of his force to intercept and destroy the small detachment. He took up a position on the northern bank of Adyar river, which met there at sea and where Paradis has to cross. On November 4, Paradis came into sight of Nawab's 10,000 strong force with position covered with guns. He had no guns, but a stern and resolute man. He had the order to go to Madras to help him, and halting or retreating would not serve the purpose. Therefore, it was resolved to cut through the enemies. They dashed into the river and scrambled up on the bank facing the gun and a volley of charges from their side. The effect was electric. The enemy gave way and retreated in terrible confusion to town. They followed the enemy with vigor and charged volley after volley as the masses jumbled in the street. In the meantime, the French Madras garrison also reached out from behind after hearing the news. It was a demoralizing rout for the retreating Nawab army. Mahfuz Khan fled with the first charge, and the rest of the army, without a leader, fled in the direction of Arcot. Of all the decisive actions fought in India, none was more memorable than this, the Battle of Adyar. It was the very first of its kind. It was the overwhelming superiority of disciplined European contingents over the conventional native army on land. Now, from being the supplicant of Nawab of Carnatic, they have become masters of their own. The war completely altered the position, and it was the first steps toward the conquest of Hindustan by Europeans. Paradis was appointed military governor and Madras was declared French under the right of conquest, disavowing all previous engagement including La Bourdonnais ransom treaty, which was now null and void. Governor Morse and his officials were declared prisoners of war. Some of their members made an escape. Among them was the soon-to-be famous writer Robert Clive. The fairly fortified Fort St. David near Kadlur, 12 miles south of Pondicherry, now became the seat of English and the new target of Dupleix to rout English from Coromandal Coast. Dupleix asked Paradis to come to Pondicherry soon after settling affairs at Madras with a troop that could be spared. In the first week of December, Paradis was able to move to Pondicherry with 300 men and the loots of Madras. This was not gone unnoticed by Nawab, and again Mahfuz Khan assembled 3,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 horses, best of their army, and took position near village Kuntur, 22 miles south of Madras, through which the French would pass. Paradis, unconscious of the enemy in the vicinity, was moving carelessly. He divided his party in two parts, the advance party and the rear guard, and in between there were coolies. Suddenly, Mahfuz Khan cavalry appeared with the intention of attacking the rear guard. But the attitude of French shook their confidence, and they just hovered around, forcing the French to be in constant formation. Uneasy and fearful of being overtaken by night before he reached the Dutch settlement at Sadaras, 12 miles away, he sent the coolies forward and brought the advance guard as rear protection. Meanwhile, he slowed the pace of rear guard advance and kept engaging the Nawab army. This paid dividend and they reached Sadaras with a minor loss. And once reached there, he halted for some time to receive further reinforcement and move forward towards the French military camp at Ariakuppam. Mahfuz Khan, seeing no material gain, retreated. The French were now the master of the east coast. Dupleix, who now set his eye on Fort St. Davis, for which he had arms and ammunition. But the commander-in-chief of the French army at Pondicherry was old General D. Bury. Dupleix wanted to give command of the Fort St. Davis operation to Paradis, an engineer by profession, but his Swiss birth, lower rank, and jealousy of recent success were hindrances. So Dupleix abandoned the idea, and under the command of de Bury, the French crossed the river Pannar and took possession of a walled garden a mile and a half northwest of Fort St. David and became at ease for further action planning. English, with 300 Europeans and 1,000 regular native troops known as the peons, were all determined to defend the fort in the strongest possible way. They had also made intimate relations with Nawab, whose local forces with 6,000 horses and 2,000 foot soldiers attacked the French, relaxing carelessly in the walled garden. In the panic, they retreated back to the other side of the river, but without much loss due to their prompt handling of their artillery, which inflicted considerable damage on the Nawab army. The English garrison also reached there, but it was a little late. Both parties did not want to take risk, therefore the English and Nawab army retreated back to Kadlor and the French retreated back to their military base in Ariakuppam. Even after fruitless effort, Dupleix again planned the combined attack, both from the seaside and land, once the French squadron of 4 ships from Achin arrived under Dordelin. But the idea was abandoned due to the feeble and unenterprising Dordelin and the worn-out and incapable General de Bury. Meanwhile, Dupleix reopened the negotiation with frustrated Nawab to abandon English, who agreed for a treaty with French, which Mahfuz Khan signed during his personal visit to Pondicherry at the end of February. After everyone had abandoned them, the English were now on their own. But Dupleix was well aware of the presence of Commodore Patton's squadron nearby, awaiting reinforcement to rule the Indian Sea again. Therefore, once the deal was stuck with the Nawab, he sent the Dardanelles squadron to safe anchorage in Goa to be called whenever required. Whatever the reason behind it, Dupleix lost the golden opportunity to strike Fort St. Davis from both the sea and the land simultaneously. After the Nawab troops withdrew, Dupleix called the Security Council meeting and pressed upon the officers assembled to accept the leadership of Paradis, keeping aside their self-interest in the crisis. On the March 13, troops under Paradis marched along the coast and reached Pannar, a quarter mile from the river. The English came out of the fort and took an aggressive position on the south bank of the river. But Paradis crossed the river and reached the walled garden from where earlier the French had retreated. The English moved back to fort, but on March 14, when Paradis was planning to strike, he saw in the sea the arrival of the English fleet of vessels under Admiral Griffin from Calcutta. This also endangered the safety of Pondicherry. And before the English recovered from the joy, Paradis crossed Pannar back and reached Pondicherry by evening. Now it was the turn of Dupleix, entirely cut off from the sea and now on their own. Further, the reinforcement received from Bombay, Tellicherry and other places increased the troop numbers at Fort David. The French are currently in danger from all sides with a small garrison defending Madras. But Dupleix was born to shine in adversity. He asked Dardanelles to move as soon as the monsoon was over, taking with them all the French ships available at Port Louis and Bourbon. The governor of Bourbon was positive about the call and he reached Karaikal in the mid-June with 9 ships. On June 21st, he approached the roadstead of the Fort St. David, where learning the superiority of the English fleet, he avoided a fight and moved at night to Madras, where he landed the much-needed 300 soldiers and cash in silver and hastened back to the Isle of France. Ignorant of this movement, the admiral moved to sea in search of French fleet. Hearing this, Dupleix dispatched on June 27 a force of 800 Europeans and 1800 Sepoys to surprise the English at Fort St. David. With the French movement, the new English leader Major Lawrence moved all his guns from Cadlore city back to the rampart of Fort St. David, and at night when the French, unaware of their preparedness, scarcely played ladders to attack, they received numerous fire shots from rampart, causing destruction and disorder. Utterly confused and panicked, they again retreated back to Pondicherry. The fourth attempt at Fort St. Davis of Dupleix failed. Meanwhile, to regain superiority in the Indian Sea, in November 1747, the English dispatched young Rear Admiral Boscawen with double military and navy command, along with 8 warships and 11 accompanying ships with 1400 Europeans on board. He arrived at Fort David on August 11, 1748 to join Admiral Griffin's fleet. This constituted a fleet available to the English, the most commanding force at sea, far more than the Dutch fleet, which conquered Pondicherry in 1693. He landed troops to augment the strength of 60,000, of whom 3,700 were Europeans, at Fort St. David. On August 19, he sent a detachment of 700 Europeans to attack the Pondicherry military camp at Ariakuppam, where Law was in command of defense. He fought fiercely and inflicted heavy damage on the casual and overconfident English army. But unfortunately, a gunpowder store exploded in their camp, killing around 100 of his men, forcing Law to retreat to Pondicherry. On September 6, the Boscawen moved to Pondicherry for fierce fighting, in which Paradis was mortally wounded. This was a great loss to Dupleix, but calm in danger, he maintained serenity and took direct command of military operations. Boscawen, this time loaded with heavy gifts, had brought Nawab by his side. However, Dupleix's skill and valor prevented the siege and attack on Pondicherry both from land and sea for 42 days. And in September, with the start of rain, sickness moved into the English camp. At last, they retreated to Fort St. David, leaving behind 1,065 men who perished during the siege. Thus the firmness, skill and boldness of Dupleix, the destruction scheme of Boscawen to root out the French from Indian soil was foiled. This crowning success placed him in the pinnacle, far behind the reach of ordinary applause. Messenger had been instantly dispatched to Arakat, Hyderabad and Delhi to acquaint the native potentate with how the most formidable foreign army that ever landed in India had been shattered against the wall of Pondicherry. Letters of congratulation and appreciation were poured from all sides. The English were declared inferior and annihilated. But when Dupleix was further making earnest preparation for the renewal of offensive operation, orders from Europe reached to both parties regarding the suspension of arms. Pending negotiations which were going on, Aix-la-Chapelle, which ultimately finalized and whose one article was to surrender Madras to English. Dupleix had to obey. Thus, after the contest of 5 years, the foundation of eternal enmity between English and French was laid. This was the enmity that could only be seized with the destruction of one party. Additionally, the victory of Europeans over native Indian at the pivotal Battle of St. Thome gave rise to, particularly among the French, the ambition of an empire which at first was hazy but gradually solidified into a more practical shape. The treaty also brought back English to the 1745 level from where they had started. And though peace was regained in East India's companies in London and Paris, it was not going to continue in India. In the following episodes, we will look at how Dupleix rose to the pinnacle of power in South India, threatening the complete eradication of English from Hindustan.